Okay, I'm going to open with a little bit of prayer because it's centering. It's nice. It makes me feel less anxious. Dear God, thank you so much for everything that you do in our lives. Thank you for the sun that rises and just everything that you do, all the mercy and the grace that's new every morning. I just pray that you give me the words to speak, God, that you just, fill me with your spirit and, give me whatever words that you need to be said, God. And I just pray for the hearts of this room, Lord, that you open them to be receptive to your truth, God. And just thank you for this opportunity. Pray this all in your heavenly name, Jesus Christ. Amen. So my name's Sam. If you haven't met me yet, I would love to meet all of you. If I could, I've got a house there, and I've got coffee. So if you like to drink coffee, I too like to drink coffee. Please come over and have coffee with me. A little bit about myself. I was raised on Middleton Island in a small town called Providence Bay. Yeah, are you from Middleton Island?
Yeah, my parents are from there.
Oh, what's your parents' names?
Well, they're not there anymore.
Okay, cool. Sounds good. So I was raised on Middleton Island, and out of high school, I wasn't a very good student. I initially wanted to go to school for airplane mechanics because I thought I had a knack for math, but God told me to go to a small seminary down in Toronto called Tyndale University. So I went there for my BA in Biblical Studies and Theology with a minor in history because I like history. And then I did an MDiv there, which is a Master of Divinity. It's a 3-year program with an internship. And it's like going more in depth, and it goes more towards a pastoral bent than an academic bent, which is really, really cool. I graduate on Saturday, so that'll be really fun. I'm going to go down south. Yeah. So I'm going to be with you guys for the month of May. I'm going to preach 4 sermons. So I plan on preaching some of the passages in the Bible that have shaped my understanding of what ministry is. Now, I'm not the type of person that saves the best for last, so I'd figured I'd turn to one of my favorite passages in the whole Bible, which is John 13, 1 through 17. The passage is rich in this theology, it's Christology. There's so much going on, but especially pastoral theology. The text is all about service and this idea of service. So if you want to turn in your Bibles to John chapter 13, I'm going to read out of the NKJV. It's just because this is the Bible my mom gave me. And I love all the markings I got in it. So, John chapter 13, verses 1 to 17 says, Now before the feast of the Passover, when Jesus knew that his hour had come, that he should depart from this world to the Father, having loved his own who were in the world, he loved them to the end. And supper being ended, the devil having already put it into the heart of Judas Iscariot, Simon's son, to betray him, Jesus, knowing that the Father had given all things into his hands, and that he had come from God and was going to God, rose from supper and laid aside his garments, took a towel, and girded himself. After that, he poured water into a basin and began to wash the disciples' feet and to wipe them with a towel with which he was girded. Then he came to Simon Peter, and Peter said to him, Lord, are you washing my feet? Jesus answered and said to him, What I am doing you do not understand now, but you will know after this. Peter said to him, You shall never wash my feet. And Jesus answered and said to him, If I do not wash your feet, you have no part of me. Simon Peter said to him, Lord, not my feet, but also my hands and my head. And Jesus said to him, He who is bathed needs only to wash his feet, but is completely clean. And you are clean, but not all of you. For he knew who would betray him. Therefore he said, You are not all clean. So when he had washed their feet, taken his garments, and sat down again, he said to them, Do you know what I have done for you? You call me teacher and Lord. And you say, Well, for so I am. If I then, your Lord and teacher, have washed your feet, you also ought to wash one another's feet. For I have given you an example that you should do as I have done to you. Most assuredly, I say to you, a servant is no greater than his master, nor is he who is sent greater than the one who sent him. If you know these things, blessed are you if you do them. So what is going on here? For the sake of context, I think it's important to zoom out a little bit on the book. John, as a writer, is very, very intentional in how he structured his book. There are 4 subdivisions in the Gospel of John. He starts with the prologue, which some people call the logos hymn, because logos is the Greek word for word. And it talks about that in the beginning was the Word, and the Word was God, and the Word was with God. So this is this logos hymn, and it describes the pre-existence of Jesus and proclaims that he is God. After the prologue, John moves into what's called the Book of Signs, which is a cool name. And it spans from chapter 1 all the way to the end of chapter 12. And within the Book of Signs, John describes 7 specific miracles of Jesus that point to the fact that he is God. Which, I don't know if you're into biblical numerology, but 7 is the number of completion. And if you read the book of Revelation, you see a lot of 7s, which is really cool. But, like, you might think to yourself, do these really point to the divinity and glory of God? And I think they really do. Even the first one, like, you might think the wedding feast at Cana, how does turning water into wine point to divinity and glory? But there's this beautiful imagery with wineskins. So it's talking about old wineskins. You can't put old wine into new wineskins. So you need to have new wineskins. And it's this idea of covenant. So there's the old covenant, which has passed away. Jesus has fulfilled it and brought about the new covenant. So that's what the wedding feast at Cana is all about. So after the Book of Signs, these miracles that point to Christ's divinity, John moves into what theologians call the Book of Glory. I really love the name of that book. And the Book of Glory, if we think of it like a movie, has 2 distinct scenes. Jesus sharing the Passover supper with his friends and his betrayal, death, and resurrection. Our passage snugly fits right at the beginning of this Book of Glory, and I think John is intentional in putting it here. And this is because of what the gravity of what Jesus teaches his disciples as they sit to share their last meal together. With that in mind, let's dig into the passage. John opens the passage by declaring that the Passover was about to begin. This is important because this idea of Passover sits at the center of the ancient Hebrew faith and our very own Christianity. You see, when God was delivering his chosen people out of slavery and oppression, he commanded them to sacrifice a lamb and spread all of the blood on their doorposts. Why? That's a bit weird. Because God is just, and God needs to satisfy his justice. And he was responding to the slaughter of Hebrew children by the Egyptians. So he sent an angel to kill every firstborn son in Egypt. But the angel would pass over anyone who was obedient to God in sacrificing the lamb. And it's interesting, if you read the text in Exodus, you don't actually see, it's distinct for the Hebrews. If an Egyptian were to sacrifice a lamb and put the blood on their doorpost, their firstborn would have been saved. Yeah. So this became an integral part of the Hebrew faith. They would celebrate it every year with the Feast of the Passover. And they would do animal sacrifices in the temple for God to pass over their sins. That's where the term Passover comes from. But as we know from the Old Testament, this blood did not cleanse the Hebrew people. The author to the Hebrews reiterates this point, stating, "For it is impossible for the blood of bulls and goats to take away sins." A more pure sacrifice is required to satisfy God's justice. And that brings us to the next part of the verse. John says that Jesus knew his hour had come. This is a repeating thing that happens all throughout the Gospel of John. All throughout the Book of Signs, Jesus is telling people that his hour has not yet come. And we see in chapter 13 here, his hour has come. And he actually explains Well, John explains what his hour is. His hour is his return to the Father. It's his sacrificial love displayed on the cross, which we will get back into later on as we continue to go through the passage. John goes on to add something that I find very personally interesting when he's saying he's returning to the Father having loved his own. Oh, sorry, I messed up. My bad. Oh yes, God has been directing me towards passages that highlight this idea of and importance of friendship. And I think John is presenting a beautiful example of biblical friendship with his friends around the table. This week in my devotionals, I've been reading 1 Samuel. And in the book, shortly after Saul's fall from grace, Samuel is describing this friendship between David and Jonathan. And he says that they loved each other so deeply and so much that their souls were bound together. That's really huge, and oftentimes we don't think about friendship that way. And if you don't have a super close Christian friend, I would encourage you to seek that out. Because in our friendship, we emulate Christ and his friends, building each other up in a unique and beautiful love of friendship. But that's kind of sort of beside the point. Let's continue with verse 2. And verse 2 is fascinating because they finish their meal, and John says something very interesting about Judas. He says that the devil put betrayal into Judas's heart. And you might think to yourself, why would God do that? It seems as though God is causing the death of his son through Judas. Like, it seems like God is putting evil in Judas's heart. But I think that that's the wrong way of looking at it. For instance, if you look at Pharaoh and God hardening his heart, the actual Hebrew shows that God didn't harden his heart. Pharaoh hardened his own heart. Pharaoh's actions continued to harden his own heart. And the way that the Hebrew works is God just kind of let it happen. I think that's the same with Judas. Like, God just removes himself from it, and he says Judas is broken in his heart, and he's going to betray Jesus. So verse 3 then sets the tone for Jesus' act of service. It states, Jesus, knowing that the Father had given all things into his hands, that he had come from and was going to God. Why does John say this? In this, just like throughout the rest of the book, John is pointing to the divinity and authority of Christ. When John is saying that God had given all things over to Jesus, he's saying that Jesus has all the authority and the power of the whole Trinity, of the whole Godhead. If he wanted, he could call down legions of angels and destroy all of the Romans and the Pharisees and institute a kingdom by the sword. And that's actually what the Pharisees thought he was going to do. They didn't think he was going to be some meek, humble guy. They thought he was going to be a warrior king. But as we see throughout the rest of our passage and the rest of the book, he doesn't do that. Instead, he serves. The second part of the verse is also a little wink and a nod pointing to Jesus' divinity as well. John is making a direct parallel to his description of God in chapter 1. He says, which says, in the beginning was the Word, and the Word was God, and the Word was with God. For John, oh yes, I should read this part too. Yeah, so it says that he had come from God and was going to God. So it's a very similar mashup. Like, John is paralleling himself, pointing to that divinity. And with all this set up, we get into the meat of the text. They finish their meal, and Jesus gets up. He takes off his robes, grabs a towel, girds himself, and begins to wash his disciples' feet. So, for context's sake, in first century Jerusalem, this was an absolutely crazy thing to do. Put aside the fact that Jesus is God. He's a great teacher and a rabbi to these men. Sitting around the table with him, and he washes their feet. It's crazy because foot washing, although common, was not the job of a rabbi. Everyone in the first century were either walking around in sandals or they were barefoot. So you already know that these guys had some pretty gnarly feet. And foot washing became customary for feasts like this. But in all instances prior to Jesus washing his disciples' feet, the task of washing everyone's feet would belong to the lowest ranked servant or slave in the master's house. Jesus, by washing his disciples' feet, lowers himself to the lowest station in his society, that of the slave, that of the foot-washing slave, which arguably is worse. And as Jesus is making his way through the disciples, he arrives at Peter. And we get this beautiful conversation between Jesus and Peter. I like to call these interactions with Jesus and Peter Peterisms, because Peter's such a distinct character in the way that he does things. Like, for instance, he's like, oh, I'm never going to betray you, God. And then he betrays him 3 times. Or this instance where he's like, you're never going to wash my feet. And he's like, okay, wash my feet. And then there's at the beach, right at the end of the book of John, Jesus is cooking up breakfast. And there's this, do you love me? Then feed my sheep. Do you love me? Then feed my sheep. Peter and Jesus have this really beautiful dynamic. And Peter's like, Lord, are you washing my feet? That's crazy. I like to imagine Peter's facial expression here. It's just shock and awe. And Jesus, as he always does, responds to his friend Peter with gentleness. He looks up at Peter and says, what I am doing you do not understand now, but you will know after this. And Peter's not having it. He looks down at his friend, his teacher, and his God and says, you will never wash my feet. Peter is realizing that it is ludicrous for Jesus to do this. And Jesus responds with gentleness again, explaining the necessity of his actions. He says, if I do not wash you, you have no part with me. And then we get to the most Peter response ever. Lord, not my feet only, but also my hands and my head. Get everything. Peter loves Jesus so much that he immediately throws all of the cultural norms of his society out the window and gives Jesus obedience. In verse 10 and 11, we see John reiterate this idea that Judas is the betrayer. Jesus explains that in being washed, the disciples have been made clean, but not everyone is clean because Judas was there. And in the last section of our passage, Jesus explains his actions, which is very interesting. There are only like 2 instances, I think, within the whole New Testament where Jesus actually explains himself. The first is when he's explaining the parables to his disciples, and the second is this. Because it's not common for Jesus to explain himself, I think that we have to pay extra special attention to what he's saying here. He's basically saying to them, you guys all understand that I am God and that I am your teacher, for I am. And I've still given you this act of service. Why? As an example of how I have called you to do life. Jesus has called us to do lives of service. He says, if I then, your Lord and teacher, have washed your feet, you also ought to wash one another's feet. Do as I have done to you. That's the whole ticket. Our passage then closes with Jesus explaining the importance of humility. A servant is not greater than his master, nor is he who is sent greater than he who sent him. If you know these things, blessed are you if you do them. We're not called to be puffed up. We're not called to be a Christian social club thinking that we're amazing because we follow Jesus Christ. That's the exact opposite of what we're supposed to do. Instead, because we follow Christ, we have to follow his example of love and service. Now, if you recall earlier, we talked a little bit about how John intentionally structures the book. And he put this foot washing scene right at the beginning of the book of glory. This is because the narrative acts as a sort of microcosm, like a small look into what the whole gospel is, which is the ultimate act of love and service. Christ here is directly paralleling his journey to the cross at Calvary. Jesus is lowered unto death. He dies by cross, which is a punishment for heinous crimes like rape and murder. Doing this also that we could have the potential to participate in a beautiful friendship with the God of the universe. And that is the beautiful truth of the good news of Jesus Christ. But what does this passage mean to us here in the 21st century as we walk out our faith? Are we supposed to go around washing everyone's feet? I would say, of course not. Trust me, you do not want to wash my feet. They are smelly. But what he's getting at is this idea of humble service to each and every one of us. We're a community of humble service, and not just with each other, because we're not a social club. We're a community of humble service to everybody that we meet. A big example in my own life of someone suffering to serve me is a couple summers ago. I was having a lot of lawnmower troubles, and I'm not very mechanically inclined. Like, the stuff's not intuitive to me. But I've got this friend Doyle from church. He lived down the road. And he's this old dude I used to go fishing with. I love fishing. If you like to go fishing, please go fishing with me. But Doyle, he came over and he's like, Sam, your lawn looks like a jungle. What's going on? And I was like, fair, Doyle. My lawnmower's broken. I don't know what to do. I was thinking about leaving it. And Doyle's like, you can't do that. So he took my lawnmower. He came over. He got a trailer, took my lawnmower, took it home, and he like cleaned out all the carbs, and he went and drove me to get a new battery because I don't have a car. And he even started cutting my grass, because at the time I was studying Greek, and Greek was kind of like taking over my whole life. So yeah, he came over, he started cutting the grass. He's like, oh, it's running very fine. You'll be able to finish this lawn in no time. And I think Doyle here represents the same thing Jesus is doing when he's washing the disciples' feet. He's doing this completely selflessly out of love. Like, he doesn't have to help me. If anything, like, he could help me so he doesn't have to see the eyesore of my lawn, but he really didn't have to help me, and he did it out of love, and he did it for free. And I think that's what Christian community truly is. And it looks different for everybody, I think. Like, you could serve by playing guitar or playing piano. You could serve by singing. You could serve by preaching. It's this idea of being present and loving and there for one another in very profound but little ways. So why is this an important passage for me in ministry? Well, I think 4 years ago, I started doing student leadership at my university. And one thing that they do is a commissioning service at the start of each year for all the student leaders. And what they actually do is sit there and wash your hands. They don't wash your feet, but they wash your hands. They go over this passage. And it's very, very impactful to see the intentionality of actually doing that. And so this year, I took on a different leadership role of student council president for my seminary, and that's not to brag or anything, but it's just what happened. But I wanted to carry on this tradition because of how much it impacted me, and I went and I washed all of my student council's hands. It was a bit weird, I'm not going to lie, but I think it's a beautiful example, and I think I wanted to model that in my leadership all throughout my time there. And I think for me, in that role, it looked like leading from the back. Like, it looked like seeing all of these people's gifts and encouraging them that and praying for them. Because that's how God's blessed me. God has blessed me to be a carer. He's blessed me to be a friend. So if I can do that, it's like fertile soil for these people to really flourish in Christ. So I think, I want to sit at the center of every ministry opportunity I get into. I'm not necessarily going to wash all your hands, but I want to serve you with humility and love for the time that I'm with you. And I think that's what Jesus does here in the foot washing narrative. So, with that, I'm going to pray, and then I'll give it back to the band. Dear God, thank you so much for everything that you do. Thank you so much for your humble service. Not only that you washed 12 men's feet that you called friends and brothers, but that you die on a tree so that we could come to know you, God. So that anyone who would believe can come to know you. I thank you for that. I thank you for your sacrifice. I thank you for your joy, that we have joy in the fact that you love us so much that you die for us. Thank you for everything that you do. I pray that you bless each and every one of these people here this week, God, and I just pray that you put something on their heart in relation to service, Lord, that they can find ways to serve with how you have gifted them, God, that they don't necessarily have to do monotonous things like wash people's hands or wash people's feet, God, but if someone is gifted at making a pie or making someone laugh, that they can do that for somebody, God. That they can find where their humble service begins. I pray thanksgiving. Amen.